Welcome back to Attic to Basement Estate Cleanouts with the Raccoons in the Arts and Crafts house. I'm redoing this video 2 months later because there was a problem with the sound in the original video. Today I want to talk about one of the most memorable houses I worked in. It was a 1924 Arts and Crafts house, 1,300 square feet, and built by the owner. In fact, there was still some wood left over from the building in the basement when his son died, and the house went up for sale in 2005. It was the first and only time that I had a large amount of timbers and floorboards left over in a house. I went to a nearby lumber yard and asked them if they knew anyone who could take away and use the lumber for free. They gave me the number of 2 men, and the one that answered his phone first said he would come with a helper the next day and pick it all up. Now that we recently built our own house and I know the prices of floorboards, I can understand why the wife of the older son was upset I had not sold the wood. In 2005, I didn't think 70-year-old cut wood planks had much value, and this was before reclaimed lumber was so popular. I thought it was good to save the estate the cost of junk hauling heavy wood. The neighbors got together and bought the property so it would remain looking the same and they would rent it out. One of the new owners was a prior council member of Montgomery County. I was told the first owner who built the house had a heart attack while cutting down a tree in the backyard and died up in the tree in a harness. The EMTs had to lower him down and take him out of the harness. He worked for the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. He had 2 sons, and one never married and continually lived in the house. He repaired watches and clocks as a hobby, and even his little watchmaker's workbench and watch parts went to auction along with many mantle clocks and wristwatches. Items from a closet-sized darkroom, a drill press and lathe also went to auction with the furniture and glassware. The second floor of the house was a sleeping loft. Wooden swing-down windows that hooked up to the ceiling were all around the room. Screens must have made it a wonderful place to sleep during the hot Chevy Chase summers in the 1930s. We came across a few model boats which the sons had sailed on the reflecting pool across the street from the U.S.Capitol. I found photos of the men as boys, which the wife of the one didn't want, as they were now in their late 80s with no children. I kept them as I thought they were so adorable, and I still do. The garage was under the house in the back. Inside was parked a Chevy Chase, which had not been run in a long time. When the auction owner came with a crew to empty out the house, he said that if he could get it out onto the street, he would sell it. We all pushed that car out of the garage, onto the concrete strip and grass driveway, and out to the street. There was a tabletop music box with metal records that went to auction. It was lovely and worked beautifully. I would have bought it, but it was out of my price range. It sold for over $1,000. The house had a Stickley cabinet that went to auction. It wasn't a new piece, but it was, I believe, an original. The dining room had built-in cupboards, which the auction owner drooled over and said he wished he could take them out and sell them. This house had a lot of good memories, but it was also the only house I had to send a list to the executor of what went to trash. My son was my only helper on that job. He was home from college and helped me clean out the attic, except he kept stopping to read books he came across. A month passed after I sent my invoice for $2,700, and the executor said she would pay me. But in the end, I had to send registered letters to the executor and start the process of small claims court back in my hometown, which is where the executor and her husband lived. I did eventually get paid 2 months later for all 55 hours. When the executor got the notice of the small claims court date, she called and told me she's going to pay me now, as she couldn't get up the steps of the courthouse. And I wasn't going to tell her there was probably a ramp for disabled people to use to get into the courthouse. This house was worth $650,000 in 2005 and probably had been paid for since 1944, so all the money was for the family. A bank wasn't getting anything. When people initially called me and I talked about my hourly fee and how many hours it might take to clean out the house, If they didn't make an appointment by the end of the call to have me come out and walk through the house for an assessment, I knew they were probably frightened by the cost. What I tried to make clear to them that if the house was paid for with no mortgage, my fee was a drop in the bucket compared to the money they would make on the sale of the house. And we worked so quickly that the house could be on the market in a week or two in the hands of a remodeler or handyman, depending on how big the house was and how much stuff was in the house and the garage. I have prospective clients call me and tell me that they've been going to the house every weekend for 2 to 3 months and still hardly anything had been emptied. Then I would explain that since I wasn't emotionally involved with anything in the house, it was a lot easier for me to work in the house and think, is it saleable? If not, is it something that goes to charity or is it just trash? Most family members would admit that once they got working, they often stopped to remember about where they got an item they picked up. For example, a knick-knack on vacation as a family, and that started the people talking about the deceased family member for 20 minutes. I even worked in 3 different houses where the executor came from across the country every weekend for months and still wasn't finished in the house, but they were burned out and decided to finally hire me. The next house is from 2006. A house in Bethesda worth $585,000 built in 1958 with 2,000 square feet, which was mostly fine, until you got into one bedroom, which was frozen in time from when part of the ceiling fell onto the bed, and it was left like that for years. This owner had lamps that had figures of people on them. Not bad, just to find so many was unusual. And also unusual, besides the hole in the ceiling, was the $259 in cash from change we found around the house. This took 4 people 55 hours to clear out. The next job we had in 2006 was to inventory what was in a storage unit in Sterling, Virginia. I took a camera and a pad of unlined paper. I opened boxes and unwrapped items and took photos of them. Luckily, this unit had enough room in this unit for me to lay things out on a table, and I didn't have to work out in the hall. That's not so convenient if other people want to walk by the unit. I found 113 items, including religious statues, mechanical metal toys, trunks, and walking canes. I went home and wrote a report, had the photos printed, and sent it all with my invoice to the attorney. It's a shame that such wonderful things were kept in storage for months. This was a simple one-day job. I did learn to wear heavy clothing and thick-soled shoes as the concrete floors and storage units are cold all year long, and colder in the winter, and this job was done in November. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for listening. Please watch my other episodes to hear more about a few of my 800 clients and tips on estate cleanouts, and check out my Facebook page titled 800 Houses, 800 Jobs.